At the end of his whirlwind visit to Washington, Macron told a group of reporters that he still thinks Trump will scuttle the Iran nuclear agreement as part of a strategy of tension. My view, I don't know what your president will decide, is that he will get rid of this deal on his own for domestic reasons, Macron told reporters. The continuing wild swings in U.S. positions, he noted, can work in the short term, but it's very insane in the medium to long term. The coordinated visits from the leaders of these two key allies were dubbed the Save the Iran Nuclear Agreement Trips by Heather Conley, director of the Europe program for the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Trade policy and Russia were also on the agendas. British Prime Minister Theresa May also added her voice to those pleas in a phone call this week to President Trump. After working for more than a decade on the complex diplomacy behind the Iran nuclear agreement, the Europeans consider it their crowning non-proliferation achievement. Along with the United States, they helped erect a crippling sanctions regime that isolated Iran and forced it to the negotiating table. The deal that was eventually reached by the Obama administration in 2015 required Iran to eliminate most of its stockpile of enriched uranium, limit its ongoing enrichment activities for 10 years to a single facility, and grant International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors access to all nuclear facilities. In exchange, the U.S. and its partners agreed to lift economic sanctions. State Department officials said the Europeans had come a long way toward meeting those benchmarks. What President Trump asked for is a supplemental agreement with our allies that would allow the United States to stay in the Iran nuclear deal. We're not there yet, but we've made progress, Brian Hook, the chief U.S. negotiator and director of policy planning at the State Department, told National Public Radio this week. We've worked very well with the Europeans to try and get a supplemental agreement. But Trump himself signaled both privately and publicly this week that the efforts of the Europeans fell short. Nobody knows what I'm going to do on the 12th, although, Mr. President, you have a pretty good idea, Trump said during a joint press conference with Macron on Tuesday. But we'll see if I do what some people expect, whether or not it will be possible to do a new deal with solid foundations. Because this is a deal with decayed foundations. It's a bad deal. It's a bad structure. It's falling down. Macron said that Trump's message in private was virtually identical to his campaign criticisms of the deal. When people say that President Trump is not predictable, I think the opposite, he is very predictable, Macron told reporters at George Washington University, according to BuzzFeed. Trump repeated in his office 2 days ago, Macron said, that this was the worst deal ever. It's a nightmare, it was a catastrophe, and so on and so on. For a moment it looked like Trump was going to agree to the long-term fixes and the difficult concessions offered by our European allies and lend credence to his claim to be a master dealmaker who can make deals that other presidents failed to do, Cirincione said in an interview. While Trump could still take yes for an answer and recertify the Iran agreement on May 12, he said, it looks increasingly likely that he has sent Macron and Merkel home empty-handed to face domestic criticism for glad-handing with an unpopular U.S. president, and with nothing to show for it. People tend to think about these economic sanctions like an easy on-off switch that can be flipped as required to aid diplomacy, but you are really unleashing financial furies that, once free, are very hard to call off their targets, said Juan Zarate, a former Treasury Department official who helped craft the sanctions and the current chairman of the Financial Integrity Network. Iran never fully reintegrated into the global financial system, even with the nuclear agreement, Zarate said. In an environment in which the United States is going to expand sanctions, the private market and international banks will likely find it too risky once again to do business with Iran. Assuming President Trump walks away from the Iran nuclear agreement, the Europeans will probably try and keep it alive somehow, but that will be very hard to achieve because every option will require that they trust the United States to keep its word going forward, said Christoph von Marschall, a resident fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Because of the Trump administration's inability to speak with one voice, and President Trump's love of ambiguity and unpredictable decision-making, there is just a fundamental lack of trust now in the transatlantic relationship. James Kitfield is Senior Fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress and the author of the recent book Twilight Warriors, The Soldiers, Spies, and Special Agents Who Are Revolutionizing the American Way of War, Basic Books.